Hello and welcome to First Christian Church's Adult Fellowship Bible Study. We continue in our study of the book of Isaiah, which is in the Old Testament. I say book because, as we have learned from the previous two introductory lessons, what we have inherited here in the book of Isaiah in our Bible is what scholars say is a edited compilation of several prophetic or prophets, you could say, over a period of a number of years, possibly a couple hundred years even. Scholars report the book is not assembled also in chronological order, by which the oracles were actually given to the kings. That will become clearer as we get over into the book a little ways, especially chapter 6, where the chapter opens with more or less these words: when Isaiah started at the time of Uzziah's death. So several scholars suggest that around Uzziah's death was when the prophet Jeremiah started his oracles, and they probably continued, and that was 742 BC, and it continued then until somewhere or another around the end of Hezekiah. Today, we will look at the opening verses of the first oracle. And again, only the opening verse, a real long oracle. And we'll break it up into a number of sessions. And today we'll look at the first 9 verses of chapter 1. This oracle, scholars note, is referring to a very critical period during the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah, which, by the way, is the last of the kings that's mentioned there in that series of kings, starting with Uzziah, and then the last king listed is Hezekiah, and therefore scholars say this first oracle is 40 years after probably the first king that's mentioned. But they start there because it's a very important event. Scholars date this situation to, in the opening oracle, a period during the nation of Judah, that is, the southern tribes of Benjamin and Judah, plus the appropriate number of Levites assigned to them. They were had been besieged. The whole country had been besieged by Assyria during the reign of King Hezekiah. And he reigned from 715 BC to 687 BC. Judah was invaded by Assyria during this event, during the latter part of his kingship there, at 705 to 701, when they destroyed the countryside. Massive damage to the population, but failed and besieged Jerusalem for quite some time, but failed to actually conquer it. This first oracle is organized into 3 to 5 distinct themes, and it's being presented, scholars say, as a prosecution in a lawsuit in which the charges and summons are here. The Lord brings charges against the people of Judah and Jerusalem, and it appears, some scholars say, that heaven and earth seem to be the jury here in this metaphoric situation. Scholars teach that as we read this, we must be careful and pick up the individual stanzas' meaning as if they stood alone, but at the same time retaining the idea that this is a tree within the forest, and we have to pick up also the meaning of the whole. As we said earlier, scholars say it's a very difficult book to understand. And part of that is because of this concept that these stanzas can stand alone, and at the same time they have significant meaning of a whole within a whole. So we will break this oracle into many small pieces as we go through it and study it. And keep in mind that much of what's here is symbolic. They're symbols, and we will try, using the scholars, to interpret what those symbols mean. So let's read those first 9 verses in the New Revised Standard Version, Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1 through 9. The vision of Isaiah, son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Hear, O heaven, and listen, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I reared children and brought them up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know. Does not know. My people do not understand. Ah, sinful nation, people laden with iniquity, offspring who do evil, children who deal corruptly, who have forsaken the Lord, who have despised the Holy One of Israel, who are utterly estranged. Why do you seek further beatings? Why do you continue to rebel? The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but bruises and sores and bleeding wounds. They have not been drained, or bound up, or softened with oil. Your country lies desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. In your very presence, aliens devour your land. It is desolate, as overthrown by the foreigners. And daughter Zion is left like a booth in a vineyard, like a shelter in a cucumber field, like a besieged city. If the Lord of hosts had not left us a few survivors, we would have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah. Several scholars open with this idea. This is presented to an audience to be heard, with the poetry designed to evoke a pictorial response immediately as it's being read, and then a deeper, more cognitive response after they've had time to think about it for a while, and of course then to ultimately correct their actions. Dr. John Oswald at Asbury says, and remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So always catch the picture as you read Isaiah's oracle. Dr. Christopher Seitz, professor of Old Testament at Yale University School of Divinity, authored one of the most highly respected commentaries on Isaiah, and he notes the following. He said, first of all, appreciate a rebellion has already taken place here. It's not about a future rebellion. This is about a rebellion that's already occurred. This is not in the future tense, but past tense. They have rebelled against me. 2, they do not know. My people do not understand. They are estranged. They have rebelled against the Holy One of Israel and are estranged from the Holy One is implied here, he says. That Holy One they call Yahweh, or Lord of Israel. Yahweh is a father figure to them, is implied and essentially said here. And the people are his children. Heaven and earth are non-rebellious jury in this, he says. Scholars teach that the Holy One of Israel is Yahweh. Holy One is a primary title used in Isaiah and other places in the Old Testament. It will be the primary way Isaiah refers to the Lord God of Israel. And he adds here that this emphasizes that their God is absolute holiness as compared to humans. And by adding Israel, there's this implied understanding that these people have that he is their father. He's not the father of the rest of the world. In other words, they're his only children. It's the way they look at it. So they have a personal relationship, like a father-child relationship with Yahweh. And that's carried out and tied into their religious system. And the prophet then hears voice, represents Yahweh speaking to these people, speaking to his children. Yet he is like a parent to us, but not a parent of other people. Was an Israelite paradigm. Only they were God's children, was their idea. Dr. Tucker, who we've referred to before, in his compendia, or commentary rather, he has since passed recently, but he is at the time he was writing, he was professor of Old Testament at Emory University. Others note that to know, he says, and to understand are important expressions here in Isaiah and the Old Testament in general. In general, failure to know refers to not having the mental tools or opportunity to know, and therefore they can't judge right from wrong because they don't know right versus wrong to start with. While understand seems to imply they know the difference, they understand right from wrong, but lack the wisdom and to will themselves to make the correct decision relative to right and wrong. In this case, the so-called dumb livestock know their owner and where to go obtain the food. The crib used there as an example. But God's children, meaning Israel, do not know their God nor understand his rules as their food to live by. Instead, they intentionally rebel against that God, against that source of teaching, against that source of spiritual food. Thus they are not following God. They are sinning and thus separating themselves from that understanding that God and Father. The result is they are full of iniquities, it said here, and do evil, and thus forsaken and abandon God. And he actually is despised by them, is said here. Social scholars teach that's an important concept to pick up here, that under norms of that time, failure to obey a father's rule was considered to despise the father. An underlying social mores that's present in that day and time. Yahweh here is asking the children of Israel, specifically those descending from Judah and Benjamin, and their few Levites associated with them. Why do you seek further punishment? Scholars note in verse 5 through 9 there, those are, most of us say this is time and place sensitive here. That is, why does Judah as a nation want more punishment at that time and place? They are under terrible situation. They are already in terrible shape as a nearly totally defeated and conquered nation by these Assyrian invaders. And they are remain very vulnerable. Why has this happened? Is being asked here. Because you are disobedient to Yahweh. And out of your ignorance, your willful decision to remain ignorant, you have made decisions, scholars say, that has allowed you to become susceptible to the Assyrians and their way of war. Some argue it was their attack during the war when they, that instead of this being the later attack in 705 to 701, that it could even fit when the northern kingdom of Israel, those 10 tribes, were being destroyed by Assyria. Their troops came down there and did lots of damage in Judah at that time. And it could have very well fit that time as well, because they did great damage to Judah at that time. But they did not besiege the city at that time, it's my understanding of the history there. But more argue this was likely, of course, during that 705 to 701 BC period. They destroyed the countryside, then killed many of their people, that is, of the Judeans and Benjamites, and put Jerusalem under a long siege, but failed to capture it or destroy it. They were without, we have to remember, based on the history we gave here in the first 2 lessons, Benjamin and Judah, the nation of Judah as it's called, does no longer have an alliance to help them defend themselves. For the lack of a better term, they've destroyed their NATO by pulling themselves out of it. Thus, Jerusalem is defenseless, and therefore it's like as referred to here, these shacks in these cucumber fields and vineyards and so forth. It's like those. What are those? What is this symbolism? These are temporary booths or tents in a vineyard or in a cucumber field that are there, placed there during harvest time, primarily, because the intense labor, they can't be running back and forth. Plus, it's very hot, and they're seeking some shade, comfort, and so forth. So they essentially go out there and temporarily live in those fields, in those vineyards, while they're doing that harvesting. As soon as the harvesting is over, those temporary shacks made out of just a few sticks and some leaves and so forth over them, they're allowed to rot down. And so Israel, you're just as vulnerable to that old shack out there at the end of the season. Nobody's interested in coming to your defense. You have destroyed all of that. So the more prestigious scholars place the oracle around 701 BC because the attack had the greatest threat to the religious structure of Israel, the religious structure of Judah specifically. And that is the fact, had Jerusalem fallen, then the temple would have fallen at the same time, and the religion would have been destroyed and probably eradicated. But Dr. Eugene Tucker advised that Israel and Judah saw so many invasions over a period of several hundred years, with lots of devastation of the countryside, that this could fit a lot of different variations, and it's part of why he says there is, although he consistently agrees with the majority of scholars here that this is the 701 period, but he sees why they may argue for other dates and so forth. So he suggests it may not have been as time sensitive as most scholars tend to think it was, and therefore where other scholars go is this idea that no, this is being used as a general analysis, a general analogy, a general context, and could fit any time period. And there's a certain amount of that we can almost look at that thing today and place it in ourselves and say, yeah, maybe we're placing ourselves in a similar situation in this country. The more fundamentalist faiths clearly think this is even a later date and hasn't even happened yet. These are possible things that can happen. Either way, Dr. Tucker says the same main point, though, is being made, that there is cause and effect here. That the effect you're receiving is caused because of decisions that you kings and you people made over time. There are consequences. You people and nations sinned and rebelled against God's will for you and the effect. And God is allowing other humans to punish you harshly. So kings, take charge of your people. Take charge of their actions in that light, as that what they do or they're failed to lead them properly, it deals with your future security. If you do stupid, expect the logical consequences of something other than what you would like to happen. You divided your strong kingdom of Israel, which had 12 tribes, into two, leaving both sides weak. You failed to offer and maintain the alliance with your brothers. You have treated another without mutual respect for the stronger and weaker. The consequences are Israel was totally destroyed, or could be totally destroyed. In the nation of Israel, the 10 tribes, so-called nation of Israel, also sometimes referred to as the nation of Samaria, they were destroyed. You are hanging on barely, Judah. Your nation has been wicked to other nations and to the members of your alliance, and therefore to yourself, and especially towards your God. Dr. Sykes teaches to note also that they have already received much punishment here, which the prophet metaphorically calls bruises and unhealed sores that are undrained, meaning they are still infected. That is, this war is not over. The infection is still there. Pus is still there, and you don't have time to even put some oil on the scabs to soften the scabs so they're not hurting and that they're curing a little better. So the advice is for the future, correct these mistakes that you have made that led you to these past problems, or your problems are going to be worse. The other thing he points out, as do others, daughter of Zion here is mentioned in verse 8, meaning that has a specific meaning. It means the holy city of Jerusalem, according to most scholars. It is used as such often in Jewish literature. Here the metaphor is being used as along the line of this idea that this young daughter rather, it's singular there in the Hebrew, meaning Jerusalem, has been abandoned by Judah's people that were supposed to defend her. So she is as isolated as a shack in a cucumber field, or a temporary shack booth in the vineyard. Your enemy can do as he wants with her, because you do not have God's protection now. You do not have the alliance protection of other nations either. You are estranged from your God. You are on your own, in other words. Now, the NIV translates this as daughters of Zion, plural. And changing that to plural totally changes the meaning. But I think that's the only Bible that I looked at 5 or 6 translations. And that's the only one I saw that took it that way. That changes it completely. That would be changing, as scholars say, to the meaning of the women of Jerusalem. Yes, the women of Jerusalem would be vulnerable and so forth, but they say that removes the meaning that was intended by the prophet here. But most scholars take serious issue with that translation. It is the holy city that is vulnerable, isolated, and abandoned prize here. In other words, this is the place. But to these people, we have to understand this. It's a fundamental tenet of Judaism at this time and place. That they believed that God had placed his name there. And that he presented himself to them in that temple. This was the story of the book of Ezekiel. Recall, these people were out there, 200 years later now, in another issue. Ezekiel's visions are to bring them to understand that they assumed God was not with them out there. Because God had been back there in that temple, and the temple had been destroyed. And so that book is about God is where you're at. That was not the understanding at the time Isaiah was writing. Now this is where they expect to find God, in that temple. That's where God's messages will come from. That's their understanding. And we need to understand it from where the writer is trying to take us, and that is in those things that he assumes they understand. Yes, the women there, of course, would be quite vulnerable to the enemy. But it's just not the message that's being taught here in the Hebrew language, scholars say. Instead, it's the city on the hill, Zion. Jerusalem was the center of their religion. It was the center of their temple. And it was militarily, strategically, an extremely important piece of real estate from the standpoint of a place that could be very well defended. Assyria had the greatest army in the world at that time, and he could not take it because it's a very defensible place. Sodom and Gomorrah get mentioned right here at the end, but because that also is the lead to the very next stanza, I will take that up in our next class. So I hope these notes that I'm bringing in here from these scholars help you understand some, at least, scholarly understanding of what's here in the opening of Isaiah. Hope you have a good bout of study. We'll see you in the next class.